As anyone who's tried it can tell you, writing a short story can be a difficult process, in some ways even more difficult than writing a full novel. After all, how do you tell a whole story with fully fleshed plot, characters, and world in just a few pages? Well, today I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step process that turns this from a seemingly impossible challenge into an incredibly achievable goal, as we look at the 10 steps to an unforgettable short story. Because short stories are small, self-contained pieces, the inspiration for a short story can be something incredibly simple. Where a novel really needs 2 or 3 combined ideas to fill out its length, a short story generally forms around one idea, without a lot of subplots or B-stories. What you're looking for is a picture or idea that can be summed up in a single sentence, like a detective shows up to a snowbound house to solve a murder. What you're looking for is an electric image, some picture or idea that just sparks something inside of you and gets you going, man, that's just cool. Once you have your idea, you now need to determine the tone of your story. Let's say that your electric image is a high school that's completely run by AI. Now that you have this idea, how do you want to tell this story? Is it going to lean more sci-fi dystopian, or will it be humorous? The thing to always remember when writing a short story is it's all about creating a feeling. How do you want your readers to feel as they're reading your story, and what feeling do you want them to take away from your story? Once you've determined the tone, you've given yourself a target to shoot for as you're writing your story. So let's say you've decided it's going to be humorous. As you're writing, keep asking yourself, is this funny? Or if it's suspenseful, be asking yourself, am I feeling tense? Once you've set your tone, you now need to determine what promises you're going to make to the reader. There are 2 promises you need to make and keep with your reader: the tone promise and the specific promise. The tone promise assures the reader that you're going to make them feel a certain way. If they start reading your story and it's funny, there's an inherent promise that it will remain funny until the end. Conversely, if the tone of your story is suspenseful, there's a promise being made that you will keep the reader in suspense until the very end. The specific promise is an assurance given to the reader early on that if they stick it out through the whole story, you will give them something very specific. For example, if a detective shows up on a crime scene with a limited number of suspects, there's a specific promise being made that you will reveal who the culprit is by the end. The specific promise is just an assurance to the reader, hey, if you stick around for this story, I'm going to give you something really cool, a revelation, a twist, or a cool adventure. So now that we have our tone and specific promises set, we can begin thinking out our story in terms of making good on these promises. You can think of this very loosely in terms of a 3-act structure, with the first act being making the promise, the second act being all of the action taking place in fulfilling that promise, and the third act being the final fulfillment of that promise. So in our detective story example, the first act would be the detective showing up at the crime scene, the second act would be the investigation, and the third act would be the revelation of the culprit. The reason we want to keep the idea of 3 acts very loose is that some of these elements might be considerably shorter or longer than others. For example, the detective might show up on the crime scene in the very first sentence, and we may not even get the identity of the culprit until the very last sentence. So where the 3-act skeleton of setup, action, and conclusion helps you keep your specific promise, it's the order of information that helps you keep your tone promise. For example, if the tone of your story is comedic, you may have certain information way out front. Let's say Angela is going to what she believes is a costume party dressed up as a clown, but we the reader knows she's actually going to an intervention. The fact that we know this and Angela doesn't goes along with this comedic tone, so it's fitting that the information is laid out in this order. Conversely, if the tone of our story is suspenseful, there may be information we want to hold until the end, like the identity of the murderer. In the short story The Lottery, the final revelation of what the lottery actually is kept hidden until the very last line, maintaining this tone of suspense throughout. When it comes to creating characters for your short story, there's one word you need to keep in mind: attitude. The fact is, we just don't have time for a full deep character dive, so you want your main character's attitude formed around 2 or 3 strong, distinctive character traits. Ideally, traits that conflict with each other. Having a main character with conflicting character traits will give them a sense of internal conflict, and in terms of story, conflict is always good. In my short story Booth, the main character engages in a battle of wits for $100,000, with the catch being if she loses, she dies. The challenge was this: I have a character who's smart enough to win this game, but should also be smart enough not to gamble her life. I solved this by giving her a conflicting character trait. In addition to being extremely intelligent, I made her extremely competitive. So on the one hand, you have this intelligent part of you saying, hey, you shouldn't play this game, but then there's that competitive side saying, but I can win. Seeing these two sides of her nature in conflict were what made the character and the story interesting. The key to memorable characters is motivation. It doesn't matter so much what they want, just that they want it really, really badly and are willing to do whatever it takes to get it. So by this point, you're hopefully seeing how one step really leads into the next. Just as our promises set things up for our story structure, so our character's attitude sets things up for dialogue. When a character speaks, you should think of their attitude as a filter, with all of their words being affected by whatever their attitude is. Let's look at the line, "Could you pass the salt?" run through two different filters, rude and timid. Hey, moron, pass the salt, would you? Hey, when you get a chance, if you wouldn't mind, could you maybe pass the salt? Thanks. Two lines that contain virtually the same information, but that sound very different based on which attitude filter we use. In a short story, it's absolutely vital that dialogue is sharp, specific, and full of conflict. Always keep your character's motivation in mind. How is what they're saying help them get closer to what they want? When world building in a short story, it's necessary to infer a world. The fact is, you just don't have time to talk about the weather or the way the government works or the architecture of the buildings. What you need to do is drop a few very specific details that are in keeping with the tone of your story and let the reader fill in the rest with their mind. Here's a golden piece of writing advice that will keep you from ever describing more than you need to. It's not about the look of a place, it's about the feel of a place. When describing a setting, drop in only as many details as you need to convey the mood that you're going for. For example, if your characters are walking into an abandoned house and you want to convey the creepiness of the place, it's not important that we know what year the house was built or what style the wainscoting is. Drop in details about creaking hinges and wind whistling through broken windows until you get that sense of, yeah, this place is creepy. It's imperative that whenever possible, your sentences pull double or triple duty. Every sentence in your story needs to be doing at least one of three things: advancing the plot, revealing character, or establishing the story world. Because your short story may be only a few pages long, the best sentences are those ones that do two of these things, or better yet, all three. Consider this line: Jack raced across the catwalk toward the forbidden zone, muttering under his breath, "Don't look down, don't look down, don't look down." Notice what this line is doing. It's advancing the plot, it's telling us something about the story world with this whole forbidden zone thing, and it's telling us something about the character. He's afraid of heights. Every line of your short story should be structured so that if it were removed, the story would no longer make sense. Great opening and closing lines are important for novels, but they're absolutely vital for short stories. Remember, short stories are all about conveying a strong feeling. The opening line needs to set that hook, telling the reader, hey, if you read this, this is what you're gonna feel. And the closing line needs to drive that feeling home, filling the reader with this sense of, yes, I got what I was promised. The key piece of advice to keep in mind for opening and closing a short story is show up late, leave early. If this is a detective story, let's not start with the detective getting a phone call and driving to the crime scene. Let's start with bam, he's there. On the other end, once we reveal the culprit, let's not hang around. Let's make good on the promise and be out.
Yes, this is the camera that was used to take your wife's picture.
So comment below if you found this helpful, let me know what other questions you'd like answered, and subscribe for more writing tips.